Hello friends and welcome back to a weekend reading vlog. Today is Friday and I just felt like it was time for us to sit down and read some more Palestinian books together. This is not for any particular readathon, it's just something that I felt like I wanted to do. And I mean, it does feel quite timely this weekend as well, especially because I think on Monday it will be 100 days since this genocide started. And obviously I know that these reading vlogs are not going to change the world, but I just wanted to, I don't know, kind of make space here on my channel for a little bit more learning. There's always more learning to do. To make space for us to focus on and talk about Palestine. Hi! You've come in to say hello, have you? Of course, this being a booktube channel, I will be reading some books and that's a wonderful opportunity to highlight and hopefully give some recommendations too. So I'm not exactly sure which books we will be reading this weekend or how many we're going to get to. But some of the books I am pretty sure we're going to be talking about this weekend are A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. I have already read this. I finished this in early January because it was my book club that I host over on my Patreon. It was our book club book for December. The reason that we might get a chance to talk about it in this video though is because I'm having my live chat with my patrons about this book on Monday. Then I actually did want to do a reread of Squire. This is a graphic novel that I did read. Was it last year or the year before? I'm so bad at keeping track. That's why I have spreadsheets. And after really enjoying this graphic novel, I finally decided that it was time that I pick up myself a full color finished copy. And I really want to experience this graphic novel as it's intended to be in full color. Then one of the books that I'm hoping we get to, at least little parts of it, is a poetry collection. This is called Water and Salt. I saw it recommended on Instagram a few weeks ago and it just sounded incredible. So I picked it up. I mean, we know I don't read a lot of poetry, but when I do read it, I tend to really enjoy it. So I hope we can get to a bit of this over the weekend. For January, this month, my book club is reading another Palestinian book. It is called Light in Gaza. And this one I just have on my Kindle because Haymarket, the publisher, were generous enough to be offering this as a free ebook. I don't know if it's still available, but if it is, I will leave it in the description box below for you. And then finally, a book I picked up at work just this week is a children's book, but I'm really excited about it. It is We Are Palestinian, a celebration of culture and tradition. It's about 100 pages and it is written for, you know, kids. But again, I just wanted to spend some time this weekend celebrating and learning more about Palestinian culture. Obviously, this is going to be a very light introduction, a very accessible one, but there is nothing wrong with that. And I'm really looking forward to this. And obviously, being a children's bookseller, the added bonus is I will be able to confidently and happily recommend this and hand sell it at work. Now for this video, I also had intentions of, you know, taking you to the weekly Naarm rally on Sunday, like I did in my last vlog. I haven't been able to go for the past few weeks because I've just been recovering from COVID, but I am well enough, so I'm hoping we'll be able to get there Sunday. Tomorrow, on Saturday, there's a beautiful event down at Altona Beach where we're going to be flying some kites and having a picnic. However, my little Ollie, who is here kind of just desperate for a bit of affection and attention, has been a little bit sick the last few days. She's okay. We took her to the vet yesterday. There's a couple of things wrong with her, but we're hoping they're going to sort themselves out. We just kind of have to keep an eye on her and make sure that everything is going okay and heading in the right direction. So how much I feel comfortable being out of the house and whether I can take her with me or not will just very much depend on how she's feeling. So this may just be a very casual at-home reading vlog, or we may be heading out and participating in some events. We'll just have to wait and see. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, and I've just finished one of my other books that I'm reading for another video that I really didn't like. So I feel like what I need right now is something light and easy and enjoyable. I love all the illustrations too. It's just really colorful. It's really pretty. And the way that it's laid out from my first glance, I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in. And I'm going to do just that. I'm going to get stuck right in. You want to say hi to everybody and tell them you're feeling a little bit better? Yeah? Welcome to Saturday. It is the Global Day of Action today for Palestine. Blair and I have just gotten back from the pool so I could do some of my exercises for my hand. And Ollie is feeling a little bit better today. She's feeling a little bit more herself. So we thought we would go down to Altona for the kite flying to be a part of the Global Action today. I'm not quite sure how long we'll be down there for. It'll just depend on how Ollie's going. I don't want to overdo it for her, but I think it'll be good. What do you reckon? Before we head off though, I wanted to let you know that I did read We Are Palestinian last night and I loved it. This is such a great introduction. It's a bit hard for me to show you things without holding Ollie, but like it's just got like each like 2-page spread gives you just like a nice bit of information about a handful of topics. For example, here we've got some traditional dress. We talk a little bit about some Palestinian towns and locations. I loved the section on cultural figures. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't. The section on agriculture was really cool too, and I just know that I would have found this so interesting as a kid. Who am I kidding? I found it interesting now. Like, especially these terraces and the hills and the side of the hills that are used for irrigation. We got a section on the performing arts. We've got a little bit about history. It's just a great introduction. It really is. As you can see, the illustrations are incredible too, and there's just the right amount of information to give you like a bit of a broad overview of Palestinian culture and important elements and people. And it's just enough to kind of whet your appetite and make you curious to learn more, which I think is perfect for a book like this. It really is what it says on the tin. It's a celebration of Palestinian culture, and I can't recommend this more, and I can't wait to hand sell this at work. As far as children, I would say it's kind of targeted perfectly for 6 to 10-year-olds, but clearly I think this is great for adults too. It's just one of those things that's a really simple, straightforward, accessible introduction. And honestly, I think non-fiction children's books are hugely underrated for how helpful they can be for adults too. Adult non-fiction tends to kind of really zero in on a specific topic and do a deep dive, whereas children's literature gives you an opportunity to have that more broad perspective, which is really helpful, especially if you're new to a topic, but even if you're not, I just thought this was wonderful. I highly recommend it. Since we're heading down to the beach, I thought it was the perfect time to get stuck into Water and Salt. I don't know if I'm actually going to do any reading down by the beach, but I'm going to bring it along with me. Come on, I bring a book everywhere I go. Before I go, I just wanted to show you this shirt that I'm wearing. It was a collaborative piece between Homie and Clothing the Gaps, which are two Australian, and I think they're both based in Naarm actually, clothing brands with a very strong like social focus. Homie, their particular focus is on homelessness. They're incredible. And then Clothing the Gaps is obviously a play on Closing the Gap, which is an Aboriginal apparel organisation. And this one says, together on purpose. It's got the Aboriginal flag here. Obviously, Indigenous struggles are inherently linked, but also the colours are pretty appropriate for a Palestinian event. And I just thought it would go well with my keffiyeh. So let's head off to the beach. We're back in the evening, and I cannot tell you how happy I am that we made it to the kite event down at Altona Beach today. The weather wasn't really on our side today. It was quite windy and rainy, but it was just such a lovely community atmosphere. It just felt like a big picnic. There was music playing, people were sharing food around, there were a few speeches, but also the mic was just open for anybody to come up, and in particular they were really encouraging children, even if they just wanted to lead a chant or two. So we stayed for about an hour and a half, and like I said, I'm just really happy that we got there. After we got home this afternoon, I did get stuck into and finish Water and Salt, and I really enjoyed this collection. As always with poetry, I don't necessarily know that I'm the best at describing the hows and what fors as to whether this is good and why it's good. All I can tell you is that I found it really quite moving and I really enjoyed reading it. I suppose if I had to try and kind of quantify my thoughts on it, I would say something along the lines of, this isn't necessarily the kind of poetry that you read for the words and like the language. Instead, I think this poetry is just really good at capturing a moment or a feeling and expressing it really potently. There were several poems in here about Gaza, about Palestine, but there were also quite a few in here about motherhood. But I want to read you two poems, and one of them is just pretty harrowing, to be honest. And I even wrote up here, the first two lines just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I had to double check when this poem was written because it feels like it's written about this moment right now. But in reality, it was written in 2014. Anyway, it's called Running Orders, and let me read it to you. They call us now before they drop the bombs. The phone rings, and someone who knows my first name calls and says in perfect Arabic, "This is David." And in my stupor of sonic booms and glass-shattering symphonies still smashing around in my head, I think, do I know any Davids in Gaza? They call us now to say, run. You have 58 seconds from the end of this message. Your house is next. They think of it as some kind of wartime courtesy. It doesn't matter that there is nowhere to run to. It means nothing that the borders are closed and your papers are worthless and mark you only for a life sentence in this prison by the sea. It doesn't matter that you have children. You live in the wrong place, and now it is your chance to run to nowhere. It doesn't matter that 58 seconds isn't long enough to find your wedding album, or your son's favourite blanket, or your daughter's almost complete college application, or your shoes, or to gather everyone in the house. It doesn't matter what you have planned. It doesn't matter who you are. Prove you're human. Prove you stand on two legs. Run. So there's plenty of poems that are just like that are just gut-wrenching. But like I said, there's also a handful of poems about motherhood and parenting and watching your children grow up. And one of my favourites was called Many Hats. So I wanted to read that one to you too. 6 is that year when all the world's magic is still within reach, and language can rise and reveal it. Science and sorcery hold equal sway for explanation, and the drudgery of budgets and aging are as yet undetected UFOs. 6 glistens like spun sugar in sunlight. And then it goes on to talk about this 6-year-old kind of like trying on all these different hats and like imagining what career or what role they might play as they get older. And it's just really, really sweet. I liked it a lot. Anyway, I think there's an awful lot to like about Water and Salt. And again, I'm so happy I read it. So I'm not sure exactly yet which book I'm going to get stuck into next. Might be Light in Gaza. I'll have to see if my Kindle is charged. And then of course tomorrow we've got the rally in the city. So I will see you in the morning. Good morning, friends. It is Sunday morning, which obviously means that we are getting ready to head into the city to meet at the State Library for our weekly rally, our weekly march. I have been doing my best to get to the weekly marches because I know how important numbers are for morale and for, you know, letting Palestinian and Arab people know in Melbourne that they are supported, that they are seen, but also obviously to add to the number of voices of dissent as far as what our government is doing. But when Blair and I got COVID at the end of December, obviously I wasn't going to go to a rally then, and I haven't been since. This week is the first week, I think in 3 weeks, that I felt well enough to go. Obviously it's important every week, but it just feels, I suppose, extra potent and poignant this week because of so many things like we've spoken about. We've got the ICJ happening at the moment. Yesterday was of course a global day of action. And then of course this weekend also marks 100 days. 100 days of the bombardment, of the cutting off of water and food, the indiscriminate bombing and the discriminate targeted bombing of hospitals, ambulances, press, journalists, libraries, schools, refugee camps, all to the backdrop of the very explicit intent of genocide. So yes, I'm feeling quite riled up and ready to be a part of this march. Now obviously this is first and foremost a reading vlog, and I did do a little bit of reading last night, but I was struggling with my concentration a bit. I did charge up my Kindle and send Light in Gaza, and I did start it. I read the introduction and then the first chapter. So I do have a bit of a better sense now of what Light in Gaza actually is, like the project of the book. And essentially it's a collection of essays and first-person experiences of people living in or around Gaza, with the aim of not only elevating those voices, but centering the experience of Gaza and what's been happening in Gaza, and centering that in the conversation of Palestinian liberation more generally. And especially in the introduction, there was quite a clear, I suppose, message to those of us who are in the West reading this book. A very clear reminder to be very careful and cautious and avoid speaking over Palestinian people, especially when it comes to political solutions. Obviously, I have my own thoughts and opinions on that, but I do my best not to really share those here because I agree, my voice is not really what matters. I think my voice in terms of being clear about my support for Palestine is important, but kind of dictating or, I don't know, like pontificating about what I think are the solutions, to me is like less the point. And I just felt like that was really clarified and affirmed in the introduction for this book. Essentially, as always, politics should be grassroots oriented, and people with a particular lived experience should be centered, should be platformed when it comes to both speaking to their experience, but also speaking to the solutions that they envisage for themselves and their communities. However, because my brain clearly is not focusing super great right now, I'm thinking tonight I might either get stuck into Squire, or I also remembered that I actually have an audiobook. I downloaded it a little while ago. It's Where the Streets Had a Name by Runda Abdel Fattah. She's an Australian Palestinian author and intellectual, and I love her. I've never read any of her books. She's written quite a lot. The only thing that I have read by her, and I shouldn't minimize it at all, it's a children's picture book that she wrote, and the illustrations were by Maxine Van Clark, who's one of my favorites. It was called 11 Words, and it was just beautiful. I couldn't recommend it more highly. It was one of my favorites of last year. But I've been meaning to get to some of her other work, and I know she has plenty of adult books too. So I did download that audiobook a little while ago. So I'm not sure exactly what book I'm going to get stuck into this evening once we get home from the march, but I've got options depending on how I'm feeling. So I think it is time, yes, it is time that we head into the city and we get marching.
We should stand for equality and an end to discrimination and racism and oppression everywhere.
Finished up my live chat with my patrons where we were kind of having a bit of a review of our experience reading A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum, and also just chatting and catching up because we like to do that too. And due to the trigger warnings of this book, some people elected not to read it, which is absolutely fair and indeed encouraged. There were a couple of us though that did make our way through the book, and I would say that the consensus was that we had mixed feelings about it. If you don't know, this is a book written by a Palestinian American author, and it is loosely based on her own experience. In this book we get 3 different perspectives from 3 different women, 3 different generations of women, and essentially this is a book about domestic violence and violence against women. There was a lot I liked about the writing, and I did really enjoy getting to know our kind of 3 main perspectives. So there was a lot that was really quite powerful about this book, and I think it's incredible that this author felt empowered to tell a story that was very much based on her own experiences. I think one of the things that I really struggled with had less to do with this book specifically and more to do with its place in publishing at large. For my book club, I try to pick books for us to read from a whole host of different experiences. I always try to make sure that the books have audio versions available, just so that the book club is that bit more accessible to people. But obviously not all books get audiobooks, and it tends to be the books that the publishers are investing that little bit more in. And I've just found all too often with marginalized voices, when a book does get the kind of promotion that it deserves and it does get an audiobook to go along with it, more often than not, those books are the really tragic ones. They're the ones often about interpersonal violence, about trauma, about suffering. Now, obviously these books are important and they're valuable in and of themselves, but I suppose I just found myself while reading this absolutely horrific book about violence, feeling quite frustrated by the feeling that publishing often only highlights and platforms marginalized voices when they fit within a particular narrative. The largely white publishing industry in North America really tends to eat up tragic stories about women, especially when they involve violence. And I can't help but feel that at least part of that is because America and the West have a very particular view of Muslim women, of Arab women, and of Arab and Muslim men. Now, I hope it's clear that I am glad that this book has been published. I'm glad that people are reading it. That is not what I'm upset about. Instead, what I'm upset with is the lack of a variety of stories that get the same level of investment and push from the publishing industry. We have heard so much recently, but even before, of how difficult it is for Palestinian and American Palestinian authors to get published at all due to how heavily politicized their very identity is. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that this is not an easy book, it's not a simple book, and I guess my experience of reading it is made all the more complex and complicated by the state of publishing more generally. And I suppose while we're here talking about it, if you know of any Arab or specifically Palestinian books, especially if they have an audiobook, but even if they don't, that don't center trauma, please feel free to leave me your recommendations in the comments below. Obviously, reading books about trauma and lived experiences are really important, and they're often books that I find really impactful and I tend to love. But equally, I don't want that to be my only reading experience of Palestinian culture and Palestinian experience. And I suppose coming back to another book that I've read recently, which was We Do This Till We Free Us by Mariam Carver. And in that book, she spoke about spectacle, specifically the spectacle of violence and how that can be really quite dehumanizing. When we are only getting stories of violence a lot of the time, I think rather than humanizing those experiences, I think it can lead to stereotypes becoming more entrenched. And clearly the solution is not that these sort of books should not be published. The solution is that more books from a variety of voices should be published. And I hope that the more that we get, the more variety of experiences and the variety of tones and kinds of stories we get increase as well. Anyway, with all that said, I'm actually in a huge amount of pain today. Honestly, I think that I gave my all to the rally yesterday. I really did. So I have just taken some of my heavier pain meds and they're starting to kick in. So honestly, I think I'm gonna go take a nap. Good morning, friends. I'm heading off to work today, which means it is time for us to wrap up our weekend vlog. But first, I have to tell you about another book that I read. So last night I spent some time rereading Squire. Now this is just such a wonderful graphic novel and I honestly could not recommend it more. As I mentioned, this is a reread for me. I read it a year or two ago. I just had like a proof copy, so it was in black and white. Anyway, this is set in like a vaguely alternative world. It feels a bit historical. And in this book, we're introduced to a girl named Isa who lives in a colonized land. Life for her and her family are pretty rough. They don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of resources, and on top of that, there is some good old-fashioned discrimination. At the beginning of the story though, Isa is given the opportunity to join the colonizers' army, and this army promises, you know, food, shelter, all of the things that these kids are kind of lacking, but it also promises the chance to become a squire, which is a very prestigious position in the army. And Isa is just really kind of captivated by this possibility of like elevating herself out of her position and also at the kind of glamour of it, the idea of adventure. And so despite her parents really not wanting her to join, she convinces them. But they have a condition. Basically, she has to lie. She cannot tell anybody like where she comes from because her parents know that even in the army, even though, you know, the army has sought these children out, she will be discriminated against. And essentially then we follow her through like her training period as she makes some friends, as she learns more about the army, and as she has to make some hard choices. I really loved the way that like misinformation and I suppose purposeful disinformation and the way that that is weaponized against the people was highlighted in this, and also just how bigotry and discrimination manifest. I loved this book the very first time I read it a couple of years ago. I loved it upon reread. I think it's wonderful. The art in this is just beautiful. I love the colors. I found the panels really clear and easy to read. I don't know, it just felt like a really well-rounded, well thought out, rich kind of construction. The entire book, the entire world that we get to dive into. I loved it. Obviously the two other books that we read and that we finished were Water and Salt, which was a great poetry collection. But I think if I had to pick a favorite book from this, it would be We Are Palestinian, this children's book. I'm so glad I picked it up last week. I know we've already spoken about it, but honestly, if you have children in your life who are kind of like, you know, wanting to learn more about Palestine, or you're wanting to introduce them to it, or if like me, you're an adult who just wants a good kind of like overview introduction into culture, into some of the significant cultural figureheads and creatives, some of the symbols, things like that. Like, I don't think you can go wrong with a book like this. And then of course we also spoke briefly about Light in Gaza, which I'm reading on my Kindle, and A Woman Is No Man. So I feel like we got a nice bit of reading done, and thank you for spending time with me and just making space to, you know, keep Palestine front of mind. As always, a big thank you goes to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie. And just a little bit of an extra thank you to Thea and to Laura this week, because I got to chat with them about this book, and I really appreciated that. I will talk to you again soon. Until then, happy reading, and of course, free Palestine. Bye.